Okay, today what we're going to talk about is just my personal journey. So you guys that don't know me can get to know me better, me and Margaret, and also Front Range and how we got started, and just a little bit of history about this young community. First, to talk about myself. Who am I? Michael Gonzales. I was born and raised in Fort Worth, Texas. I'm the third of 5 children. I'm in the middle. I had the opportunity to be a big brother for 10 years, or the youngest brother for 10 years. I was the baby for 10 years. I was able to experience that. Then when I was 10 years old, my mom had my younger brothers, and so I was able to be a baby for a while and a big brother. So I had that privilege. But I was raised in the Roman Catholic Church there in Fort Worth. The church we went to was called the Immaculate Heart of Mary. I went from catechism there all the way to 10th grade. I was an altar boy from 10 years old to 15 years old. And I went to Catholic school up through 8th grade, and so I was immersed in Catholicism. I was an altar boy, and I served, and I knew the Mass at that point in Spanish and in English, and I was just really involved in our church. And as a kid, my mom says overall I was a good boy. I was content. I never gave her a hard time. She tells stories about my brother and sister and how they would give her a hard time, and they'd go to the store and they'd throw fits because they wanted toys and various things. But I was just naturally just content. I discovered I was an artist when I was a little kid. I loved to draw all the time. But I had just it was a good childhood. I had no traumatic experiences, lots of love from my parents. I was somewhat sheltered. They didn't let me out into the world, so I was protected. But I did have lots of television. That was the babysitter that Mom would turn on the TV, and we would just sit there and just watch tons of television, which I don't think was very beneficial to us. But then when I got older, in the high school years, I was not equipped to enter public school. Like I said, I lived a sheltered life, and so when I went into public school, I wasn't ready for that, and I wasn't ready for being in the world. I think I've told you guys the stories about how when I went into the public school, I was used to wearing a uniform. At the Catholic school, we wore blue pants, white shirt, black shoes. And a lot of times you'll see me, I still dress like that. I think I've been institutionalized. I can't get out of uniforms. But when I went to the high school, I had no idea how to dress. And I just told my parents to just my mom to buy me the clothes, whatever clothes I wanted. Well, when I got to the school, I noticed all the subcultures, and I realized, wow, I don't fit in. I want to be one of the cool kids. And so, since I was Mexican, I thought, man, I guess I'm a lowrider, like all the other guys in our neighborhood. They were dressed in the shiny shoes and the baggy pants, and so I tried that. That didn't work, and so then I wanted to try the shirts with the little alligator on it and the fancy shoes, and I tried that, and I couldn't afford that. And so I'm trying all these different subcultures, and I realized that I fit in with the guys that just wore the t-shirts and the jeans. I was like an outcast, and I fit with the other outcasts. But anyway. In high school, I wasn't taught the dangers of secular society, and I hung out with the wrong people. I was influenced by the wrong people, and I went the wrong direction. Like so many youth, I got sucked into the teenage culture, which separates us from our parents. And one of the things I did was I got myself a girlfriend. Thankfully, God has kept us together all of this time. But I would not recommend that to our young people. Don't be presumptuous that because I'm telling you I had a girlfriend in high school and I'm still married to her, don't be presumptuous that same thing's going to happen to you. There's a proper way and there's a right way for us to find someone to marry and to go down the right path in doing that. So a lot of these things that I may be sharing with you guys, don't be presumptuous and say, well, if Michael did that, then I guess I can too. No, God had grace on my life, and He got me to this place. He might not have that same grace on you. But in high school, my relationship with my parents began to deteriorate. My attendance at church dropped. I had worked. My dad gave me his old 71 Volkswagen Beetle. I spent a whole year working on that thing to get that thing legal. I finally got the insurance. I got the tags. I put a stereo in it. And I went out with my buddy. I got it legal on a Tuesday. We went out on a Friday. And I wrecked it. I totally destroyed the thing. Being negligent, just being a fool. That crushed me because I worked so hard on that Volkswagen. Every year, my grades progressively declined until I finally failed 12th grade. I remember going back to the high school in 12th grade, and none of my friends were there. My whole class had graduated, and I went back. I just felt like such a fool. So I dropped out, and I went to a self-paced school where I got myself, I got out of high school. I graduated at this self-paced school. And I did graduate. Okay, guys? You need to graduate from high school. And by the time I graduated, it seemed like everything was going wrong. I was going nowhere fast. I had no future. I'm looking at all my friends, and they're not going anywhere. And I'm thinking, what in the world am I going to do? I remember feeling this feeling of anxiety that I'm going nowhere, and thinking that I had no purpose for my life. And I'm thinking, what purpose do I have? And so I started praying to God, and I started asking Him, because I knew taking your own life is wrong. So I started asking Him, if you don't have anything good for me, take my life. And I was like in the pits of despair. Please take my life. And I started praying this for several weeks. And I remember it finally dawned on me that He wasn't taking my life. And it kind of clicked, and maybe it was God revealing this to me. But my prayer was, if you don't have anything special for me, if you don't have anything good for me, then please take my life. Well, He wasn't taking my life. So then He's answering my prayer. He does have something good for me. And it just gave me some hope. And I thought, okay, but what can I do? My parents couldn't afford to send me to college, and they didn't know how to get me financial aid or anything. And so I had no idea. I had no one to help me. But I needed to get out of my surroundings. I needed to get out of the neighborhood that I was in, away from the influence that I had around me. So I joined the Army. And when I signed up for the Army, at the time I was working at Denny's. I was a host there at Denny's. And I remember when I signed up, there was another, this girl that worked there. She was a waitress. We went to the same high school. And she was telling me she was going to join the Navy. And she kept talking about it. Well, one day I showed up and I said, hey, I joined the Army. She said, what, are you crazy? There's a war going on. She said, I'm not gonna join the Navy right now. There's a war. I said, there's no war. And I never watched the news. I watched TV, but I never watched the news. I said, there's no war. That's crazy. And so I joined, and when I went to go sign up, when they go and they give you when they weigh you and they give you the physical and all this stuff, they had a big TV there. And newsflash, Saddam Hussein just invades Kuwait. And I'm like, oh, I guess there is a war going on, isn't there? So I joined the Army, and once you swear in, you're in. So you can't back out at that point. So when I get to the Army, they have the reception battalion. When you come in, and they give you the cot, and they kind of teach you about what's going to happen. They call that reception battalion, and they treat you really nice. Well, they give you food, and they treat you really good. And so there was two guys sitting by the door, and as you come in, these two guys were saying, what's your name? Or they look at your characteristics, and they give you a name. One guy ended up being a good friend of mine. He didn't have a front tooth. He was missing a tooth. So when they saw he didn't have a tooth, they said, okay, your name is now Snaggletooth. And that name stuck with him. They were given these names, and it stuck with these people throughout the whole basic training. Well, they asked what my name was. I said Gonzales. I said, okay, you're Gonzo. And that stuck with me for many years. I was called Gonzo for many, many years. But in basic training, it was actually a blast. My dad helped me get the right state of mind and going in there, and I really had fun in basic training. And then in AIT, I went to Fort Gordon, Georgia. This is where we learn our occupation. I was a mobile telephone operator, something that it's not transferable in the real world. But anyway, that was what I learned. And there was 22 of us in our class. 10 people went straight to the war right after. 10 guys, they went straight to the war. And then a couple of weeks later, they said 10 more are scheduled to go, but they hadn't announced the names yet. And I thought, okay, if 10 went, there's 12 of us left. What are the chances of me being one of the 2 people that's not going to go to the war? And there was two girls in our class, and I thought, those 2, I bet they're the ones that are going to be the ones to stay, and all the guys are going to end up going. And so an interesting thing happens when, at times of war, that I discovered. Whenever people are on the verge of going to war, interestingly enough, they want to get married. There was a lot of people getting married. There were some people, they meet on Friday and they get married on Monday. I mean, everyone's just getting married. And I had that same thing too. I don't know if it's because you think you're going to die, so I need to get married. So I flew home, and Margaret and I got married over the weekend. And when I got back, they had posted a list of who was going where. And it ended up that over the weekend, they had stopped sending people to war. They had stopped sending people over to Iraq. And the list said, we're all going to Fort Hood, Texas, the whole group of people. But it wasn't for another 3 months, because since they stopped the war, they stopped movement of all the soldiers. And so we were stuck at Fort Gordon, Georgia, with nothing to do. And so we basically cleaned the post every day. They'd send us to this one guy, and he would, okay, you're going to go clean the creeks and take all the trash out of the creeks. You're going to work in the kitchen, and they'd assign everyone. Well, since I was an artist, I said, hey, I can draw. He says, okay, you stand right here. And he had me paint all of his favorite army patches in his office. And so that's all I did. I didn't have to do any of the grunt work. And I said, I need an assistant. So I got my best friend to come with me. And so me and my buddy we sit there, listen to the radio, and just paint pictures all day long. So I ended up having a good time doing that. But while I was there, I went to church every now and then. There was no one to go to church with. No one had the same values. No one, really, even when I did take a friend with me, he didn't want to go to the church. He said, let's get out of here. They just didn't value it. And so I didn't have any reason to go because no one wanted to go with me. And it just wasn't the same when you're not going to your same, church back in your neighborhood. And then later I ended up stationed at Fort Hood. It was also an uneventful time. I just did my duty there. I did go to Germany for a few months. I visited Louisiana, Oklahoma, and the Mojave Desert for 30 days. We did training out there in California. And I didn't like it. I was getting to the point to where I did not like being in the Army. It was just overwhelming for me. It wasn't the life for me. And it was getting to the point where I was starting to get in trouble because I was starting to talk back to my superiors, and I just wasn't doing what I was supposed to. It was just taking its toll on me, I guess. And I got a job being a driver for this sergeant major, and that saved me. I think going and doing that, I would just go to his office and I would type letters for him, and so I brushed up on my typing skills, and I was kind of like his assistant, his admin assistant in his office. So that really helped me, and I would literally drive him around. We'd go when he could drive. There was nothing wrong with the guy, but he'd jump in the shotgun side, and I'd drive him around. It was really odd, but because I would want to drive myself. I don't know if I was in that position, I'd want to drive myself. But anyway, that's what I did, and then 2 years before my time to get out, the retention sergeant, which is they try to get you to re-enlist like a year before your time is up, he started coming up to me and saying, do you want to re-up? Do you want to sign up again? And I said, man, I got 2 years. You leave me alone. Every month he'd come and he said, I'm just getting the paperwork. I'm just coming to you. I'm just coming to, I'm just doing what I'm told. And I said, I got 2 years, man. No, of course, I don't want to think about that right now. And then finally in August of 1996, he came up and he says, no, 1993. And he came up and he said, it was in August, he says, you're out in a month. I said, you're kidding me. I remember I was at the end of my rope. I was just ready to wring this one sergeant's neck because it was just getting to me. And he says, look, this is your paperwork. I'm here to give you your paperwork. You're out next month. That was the best news that I could hear. Evidently, when I signed up, I thought I signed up for 4 years, but no, I had signed up for 3. I had no idea this whole time. I'm thinking I'm in for 4 years, and I was only in for 3, and I thought, good, I'm not complaining. Get me out of here because I couldn't handle it. So anyway, I was glad I was out. And once I got out in September. In October, I started college because I got my head together. I realized what I wanted to do. I was an artist. I didn't think I could make money as an artist. That's why they came up with the phrase starving artist. So I became a graphic designer. I figured, well, that you can find a full-time job as a graphic designer. So I went to art school. And at this time, I should have probably taken some marriage classes. Just being young, being together since 10th grade, and now at this point, we're just a little over 20. We're in our early 20s. I didn't know what it meant to be a husband. I didn't pay attention to my dad. I had become a very selfish person, and our church attendance was less and less. All of my attention was on my studies and my friends. College life was college life. It was just a big party. But I did graduate second in my class. So I did, I at least I was focused. I focused on my schoolwork, but I was neglecting my wife. And then once I got out of school, I just became really career-minded. And again, my marriage was on the brink, but I was just completely indifferent. I didn't care. I just wanted my career to happen. And opportunities opened up. And I began to learn the trade, and I began to get some pretty good jobs. And I was really making it in the graphic design field there in Dallas. And obviously, because she felt lonely, Margaret started asking me for a baby. At this point, we'd been married for almost 7 years. And in high school, she had wanted this little Chihuahua, this little dog. So I bought her this dog as a gift. And I asked her, I said, "Can you keep it? Are your parents going to let you keep it?" And she says, yeah. So I saved up $400 and I bought her this dog. And then a week later, she brings it back to me, and I can't keep it. So then I'm stuck with this dog. So then the dog, we bred it with another Chihuahua across the street, and then our dog got killed, and so that one had puppies, and so we got another, puppy from that to replace the dog. But then at one point she asked for a baby, so I bought her another Chihuahua. So then we had these two dogs. So now here it is 7 years later, and she's saying, "I want a baby." So I thought, okay, let's go ahead and try to get pregnant. And so we tried, and she got pregnant. And then she says, "Okay, I want to drop out of college." See, I was livid. I was angry because, again, I was career-minded. I was worldly, and my thinking was, when I was in the Army, she went to beauty school. So then when I got out of the Army, she had a job as a beautician and cutting hair. And I thought, okay, she's making money. Now I'm going to go to school. And then I thought, okay, when I go to school, when I get out, she's going to go back to school and get a business degree. And I thought this is the kind of thought we were going to do. We were going to build this empire of career-minded people and just make all kinds of money. And so when she said she wanted to drop out of college, I was livid. But then when Michaela was born, Margaret had an emergency cesarean section. And we weren't prepared for that. I wasn't prepared for that. They had her on morphine for 3 days. She was out. She doesn't remember the first 3 days of Michaela's life. She was out. And so I was forced to take care of Michaela for 3 days. And since we had already agreed, she was going to nurse, we couldn't give her a bottle because then she wouldn't nurse properly. And so they said I had to feed her with this little, the lid of a bottle. And so I was feeding her like a little bird. That's how I described it. When she was, an infant, I'm feeding her like a little bird there in the hospital. And that was one of the benefits of being an older brother. I had my younger brothers. I changed their diapers, so now all that kicked in. So I was able to change diapers and take care of a baby. But those 3 days changed my life, or at least they changed my life temporarily, because now I realized, okay, I've got a child now. I mean, when I had a wife, and you've heard me say this before, when you get married, it's you enter into a degree of selflessness, or at least you're supposed to. You're supposed to be less selfish and think about your spouse more. And then when you have children, you become less selfish and you think about your child. You enter into more and more degrees of selflessness. You're not selfish anymore. You're thinking about others. And that's kind of what I experienced when we had Michaela. I realized that I need to be focusing on these other responsibilities, this new life that was given to me, and it changed me for a little bit. But I needed more than just a baby to change my life. I needed God. But at that point, I did start going back to church because I knew the responsibility of having a baby. She needs to know God, and so we started going back to the Catholic Church. But then I had too many bad experiences at that point. That's when I realized I had some bad experiences. First of all, when we got married, when I flew back, we got married by the Justice of the Peace. And so the Catholic Church did not recognize our marriage as valid. And whenever I'd come back, when I was in the Army and I'd come back to visit, our Catholic priest, if he saw me, he would say, "There's people here living in sin and they need to repent." He would announce that. Or if he wasn't the one preaching, or going through the liturgy, they really didn't teach, if he wasn't the one going through it and he'd see me, he'd come behind me and pinch me in my back. He'd give me a good one. I'd get so mad. I'd just think, man, this guy, And so that was one bad experience. I mean, it got to the point to where we couldn't receive communion there in the Catholic Church because of we were living in sin. And it got to the point to where I wouldn't even look. They'd raise the Eucharist, and I wouldn't even look. And Margaret said, "Why don't you ever look? Every time they pick up the Eucharist, you don't even look. How come you do that?" I said, "Well, I'm not worthy. I'm not even worthy to look at the body of Christ." And so I just had this guilt. And then when Michaela was born, there was a parish that we would go to, the church that we would go to. We lived in this little rinky-dink hotel there in Dallas, but literally cross the tracks, back through the alley, behind this building, and you end up in this really affluent neighborhood. And they had this awesome Catholic church. It was the nicest Catholic church I'd ever been to. And the priest actually taught the word. And I loved it. And we'd go there, and we'd sit in the back. And we went there for several years. Then we had Michaela, and we went and we said, "Can I baptize my baby here?" They said, "Where's your address?" They said, "Oh, you don't live in our parish. You got to go to your parish." I said, "Man, I've been coming here for 3 years or more." And they said, "Well, you can't baptize your baby here. You got to go to your church, or I'll put you on a 3-year waiting list." And I thought, from the way I was taught, from the Catholic perspective that I was taught, you should baptize your baby within the first 6 months of their life. And so I was the good altar boy, so I said, "No, I need to do this." So we went to the one by our house, and I was just mad about that. So after that, I decided, you know what, we need to search for the truth, and we need to search any and all other religions, because from my perspective, Catholics were here and Christians were here. And so why would I go to the Christian church when they're just sub-Catholics? That was my thinking. And so I wanted to look at Hinduism, Buddhism, any other ism that I could find. That's what I wanted to go and look for. But then I had the opportunity to move here to Denver. And I thought, maybe if I moved to Denver, I'd be forced to focus on my marriage, focus on my family, and I wouldn't, since I wouldn't know anyone out here. But it didn't. I found more friends and started doing the same things that I used to, and just it didn't improve our marriage really. And Margaret and I, in the evenings, we would just escape into the television, so we wouldn't have to talk to each other. We were just TV junkies. We'd sit there and just watch TV. And our relationship was definitely strained, to say the least. But we did find a Catholic church that we liked, and there was a priest there that I liked. He was a young guy, and I loved the way that he taught. But something happened, and he ended up in jail. I don't know if he stole money or something, but he ended up in jail. And I thought, okay, that's it. I'm done with the Catholic Church. And at the company, I just got a new job, and the first thing they did was send me on a business trip for a month to Europe. And so I told Margaret, I said, when we get back, I want to try Buddhism, I want to try Hinduism, I want to anything. We need to find the truth. So I was gone for the whole month of February in 2000. Now, another thing that happened around this time, since we had moved from Dallas, from Fort Worth, where all of our family is, all of our family still lives like within a 5-mile radius. All of her family and my family. Our parents live only 3 blocks away from each other. And so everyone is still in that area. So when we moved out here, that was kind of a big deal. And I remember we were at the grocery store, and we're going to get margarine. We're in the margarine aisle. And Margaret grabs the Country Crock, the gray thing of margarine. And I said, why are we getting that one? She says, it's what your mom gets, my mom gets, grandma gets. This is what we get. All this is what we've done. I said, can't we try something else? I've always wanted to try parquet. Because remember the commercials that go butter, I've always wanted to try that, So we tried the parquet, and then we tried other margarines, and then we tried real butter, and then we got the Land O'Lakes block of butter, and we realized we like butter. We like the real thing, the margarine's not the real, that's not what is margarine, it's plastic, I don't know. But we like the real thing, we like butter. And so then another time we're at the grocery store, and I'm grabbing the Aunt Jemima syrup for our pancakes, and I said, why do we always get Aunt Jemima? I've always wanted Mrs. Buttersworth. Because, in the commercial, she comes out and she talks to you, she moves around the table and stuff, the bottle's shaped like a lady, and, I've always wanted to try that. And I didn't realize the reason they call her Buttersworth is because it's butter-flavored syrup. So we tried that one, and we tried all the other ones, and we tried Log Cabin, and we thought, oh, this one's a little bit different. Then we realized it's 10% maple syrup. So then we tried 100% maple syrup, and we realized we like maple syrup. We like the real thing. Whereas if you look at the ingredients of a Aunt Jemima or something, it's, what is that stuff? So we just noticed that we were going back to the original thing, as we started asking ourselves, why do we do what we do? In regard to the traditions of our family, the things that we've been brought up in. Little by little, we started to change our diet and just started changing our perspective on life. And this wasn't biblically based. This was just something that I believe God was doing in our lives and in our hearts, almost to get us ready for what he was about to do. So while I was gone, Margaret was actually 6 months pregnant with Maya, our second daughter. And while I was gone, she tried to go back to that Catholic church. And one of the things that Margaret always said when we'd go to that church and we'd leave, we walk into the parking lot and there's groups of people talking, laughing and joking, and you could tell they're different families and they'd come together. And she would say, that's what I want. I want community. I want, have other people in our lives, and and no one would invite us in. No one would come and talk to us or anything. And so that was the thing it was tough for us because we didn't have any family around. And so while I was gone, Margaret went one more time. She's pregnant and she's got little Michaela, 1-year-old Michaela, almost 2. And she walks into the church and she says she could just feel judgmental stares from the people around. Because what if she looks like a single mom, pregnant with a baby, and so people are giving her these looks. And so she didn't like that, so she left. And there was a woman that she was working with at this retail shop, and she ran to this woman's house because she knew this lady was Jewish, or there was something about her that she obviously knew God. So Margaret went over to her house while I was gone, and she told her this experience, and that we haven't received communion in over 10 years because we've been married by the justice of the peace, and along with this woman there was our friend Donita, the dance leader. Donita was there with her. And both her and Donita, they said, you can receive communion right now. And, Margaret thought this woman was Jewish, but she's actually Messianic. They pulled out the Manischewitz and they pulled out the matzah, and they had communion right there. And Margaret accepted Yeshua right there in their living room. And so while I was gone, Margaret started attending the Messianic congregation there in Denver where they were going. And she went to their small groups, and they prayed for me while I was gone, and so they all knew about me. And so when I returned, there was this big welcome for me, and I thought, this is kind of strange. Well, before that, Margaret had said, when I got back, I said, okay, now we're going to start looking for the truth. We're going to go, to these places. And Margaret says, let's try this place. She says, I've been going there while you were gone. It's Jewish. And I thought, Judaism. That's an ism that I hadn't really considered. And so we went, and they welcomed me, and it was just really a really nice place. And that's when I heard the Torah taught for the first time. I had never heard the Bible taught. At our Catholic church, the priest, after they do the reading, they do like a 10-minute homily, and that was pretty much it. And this time, they taught out of the Old Testament, and they brought out Yeshua, and I remember I just wanted to fall on the ground crying because it was just truth. It was just amazing. I remember right after service, I ran up to the pastor and I shook his hand and I said, we're going to be back. That was incredible. And we went there for 9 years. We went there for 9 years. And while we were there, we started asking ourselves the question. When we were asking ourselves the question, why do we do what we do with all these other things? Now, God had prepared us to hear the question, why do we do what we do in regard to Sunday, Christmas, Easter, and all these other traditions that we had. And so we made these huge changes. And from our perspective, from our experience, it was a burden lifted off of our shoulders. We never had fun on Christmas. We never had fun on Easter. So to unload those things, it was a relief, and to embrace these things of God, it was really good. One of the times while we were there, because I still hadn't changed completely, we still had they would go up to the mountains, and they'd do this trip up to the mountains. Some of these guys would go camping. And so we had a little Tercel. And they said, oh, you guys can make it, you guys can make it. And wow, my little Toyota, I'm driving through the mountains up into these crevices and stuff to get to this place where they were camping. It was pretty funny. But Michaela Maya was in the little carrier, and Michaela was little. I think Michaela got elevation sickness, and she threw up. And yeah, it was an event. But just going out there, for one thing happened while we were out there, because our friend told us we could drive out there and drive back. It wouldn't be a big deal. No, you had to stay the night. We had to drive back because we weren't prepared. So it was like 4 hours down there, spend a couple of hours, and then we had to leave because the sun was going down. But anyway, I'm in a car with the pastor because and my friend was driving, and we were going to go fishing. They were going to go to this dam and go fishing. So I was just hanging out with the guys, and I'm sitting in the back, and I don't know. I think Margaret and I had just had an argument. So I'm just thinking, not very good thoughts about our marriage, and the pastor and my friend are talking because they're good friends. And out of the blue, the pastor, he just leans over and he says, marriage is forever, Mike. Marriage is forever. And then he turned back around and just went back on with his conversation. And I just thought, did he just read my mind? What was that? And that phrase just stuck with me for years. And I was just amazed at the timing of that. But it just caused me to think that God can use people to speak into our lives like that, and that's when I started to change. I still had one foot in the world, but over time, from April 20th, after Maya's birth, till October 2000, layers and layers of and that was like the beginning of it. Layers and layers of worldly thoughts and lies and dirt and grime and things were just being removed as I learned God's word, as I heard the Torah and I started applying these things to my life just began to change. And then there was one verse that in our small group that was read that just rang a chord with me. Ezra 7:10. For Ezra studied the word of the Lord so he could teach it, so he could practice it, so he could teach it in Israel. I just want to read it to you from my translation. But when I heard that passage, I remember in the small group, I asked the guy leading it. I said, "Can you read that again?" And he read it again, and then he gave me a short little teaching about it. But I want to read it to you straight from the word. Ezra 7:10. For Ezra set his heart to study the law of the Lord, and to practice it, and to teach his statutes and ordinances in all Israel. Ezra had set his heart to study the law, to practice it, to teach it. And once I caught that, once I understand that, because remember, in Hebraic perspective, to set your heart, the heart is not the seat of the emotions. He wasn't like, oh, I love the God's word. No, that's the seat of the intellect. He set his mind to study the Word of God. Once he studied it, he practiced it. Once he practiced it, then he taught it. From that point on, that became my verse. That became the theme to most of what I do. I want to study it, to practice it, so I want to find application in it. And then once I learn it, I want to share it. I want to share these things with my family, with my friends, with our community. That's the theme in my heart right now. It has been since then, since 2000. In November 2000, I was immersed. I realized I was sprinkled as a baby in the Catholic Church, and in my perspective, I thought I was in. I thought because I was a Catholic, because I was baptized, I was sprinkled with water, that I was in. And if there's nothing I could do that was going to remove that. I didn't understand that I had to have a relationship with Yeshua, that I had to be obedient and live like a follower of Yeshua. I thought that I could live like a heathen, just go to confession, and then I'm good again. And so it was this whole year was just a revolutionary change in my life, where I realized I cannot continue living like a heathen. So I was immersed, and I dedicated my life to God. We became members of that community. We jumped in full bore. We gave it everything. We gave all that we could to this community. Margaret became the children's education director. She made class curriculum. She had classes before service, classes during service, and she just organized all of the kids' classes for a while. And then later, she started a girls' dance team. She would choreograph dances for the girls, and so and she was doing a women's group, and she was doing a women's night out, and she just jumped in. I mean, because we just caught the vision of the community, and we wanted to be part of it. And through this, as we started growing, our marriage became progressively better. And as we grew towards God, we began to grow stronger in our relationship. And I told Margaret, I remember early on, I told her, I want to support your involvement in the church. And I thought, okay, she's going to be involved, and I'm just going to sit back here. I'll watch the kids, and I'll let her do her thing. But once I came to the realization that as the father, I was the spiritual leader of my family. I'm the one that's supposed to be doing something, not sitting back and watching my wife. And so once I caught that, I jumped in there, and then I started serving in the community. In early 2001, I realized the call to serve God in full-time ministry. And so I began to prepare myself by leading a small group. They called them Havara groups at this particular community. And so we started leading one in our house. And we called ours the Northern Tribes Havara group because we lived up here in Westminster. And at the time, the community was meeting down in Denver. So we call ourselves the Northern Tribes. And we met every Wednesday night for 2 to 3 hours. And the way that this church ran was that they would meet for 14 weeks. They would take off 3 weeks, and then meet for 14 weeks. Well, we thought, why take off? So we met consecutively. We didn't miss, not unless we were out of town or something. We pretty much met every Wednesday for like 4 years with several families. Zadie was there with us. He was one of those families. And we met every Wednesday, and we based the group on Acts 2:42, where it says they were with each other, listening to the teachings of the apostles, in fellowship, breaking bread together and praying. And so those are the 4 things that we focused on in our small group. Teaching the Torah, fellowship, we spent time hanging out with each other, and sharing a meal together, so we ate every time, and praying as a group. And so that's what we did for 4 years. And that year, in the fall of 2002, that's when Isaac was born. But over the 4 consecutive years that we met, the families and the singles and all the people in that group, we just grew close. We got to know each other. We were supporting each other. We just developed really close relationships with one another. But then the pastor and the leaders of the congregation, they saw how our small group was around, 30-something people? So there was about 30-something people coming to our small group. They wouldn't come all the time, but it was a large group of people that had identified with our group. And so the pastor saw that there was some leadership potential in me. And so he asked me to retire the group, to split it and to pass it off. And, we sent part, asked Zadie to step up, and we sent part to his house. And I don't know, it just kind of fell apart because the dynamic wasn't there anymore. But I still stepped up. They wanted me to be the youth director. They wanted to start a youth program. So they thought, maybe Michael and Margaret would be good youth leaders. And then later that year in 2004, that's when Miriam was born. And because I didn't have any experience in youth groups, we didn't have youth group in the Catholic church that I went to, I began to do research in youth groups. I went to some of these bigger congregations that have successful youth groups, and I started to research them to see what they did. And the more that I researched, the more that I realized, no, we don't want to do youth groups. That's horrible. The stuff that I saw, and they knew that there were guests there, the way that they acted, the youth leaders, the way that they acted, and things that they were saying to the children. I thought, this isn't, first of all, the youth director, the youth leader in that group, he looked like one of the kids. Aren't we supposed to be a model for the children to grow up to be like us? Or do we act like them? We resort to being a child. No, that's not how we're supposed to raise our children. And so the more I discovered, the more I questioned the contemporary youth group models and their so-called success. And so once I became the youth leader, the group, I called it the Young Adults Havara group, the YA group. But I came to the conclusion after working with them for 2 years that a youth group was not the solution for reaching our young people. That in fact, integrating them into the community would help keep them connected with the congregation, would help keep them connected with the adults. But in order to instill biblical principles into their hearts and in their minds, and to help them with a true relationship with Yeshua, their parents had to be involved in their lives, namely their dads. Because I remember when I first started the youth program, one woman, I'd known her for a while, she came up to me and she says, "Why didn't you do this years ago? My son's left the church and now he's off, doing these other things." But why are you blaming me? You're supposed to be doing this. This is just supplemental. But that's the way people started looking at it. Like, there was one single mom, and bless her heart, but she was on her own with her son, and she was trying to get me to come during the week and spend time with her son. I said, "Listen, I got 4 kids of my own. I find it hard just to spend time with them, and now you want me to come and mentor your child? I mean, I'm sorry, your marriage ended up this way, but I've got my own responsibilities, So it's this whole youth program was not what I wanted for the community. But before I could address the issues that I saw trying to get the parents involved, I was asked to retire the young adults group, the young adults Havurah group, and in the spring of 2006, they wanted me to join the church staff as the executive pastor. They got some fancy names for their leadership, but they wanted me to be the executive pastor. So I did. I said, "Okay, yeah," because I wanted to be full-time leadership. Later that year in 2006, that's when Aaron was born. So I worked toward fulfilling the requirements that they set for being a full-time pastor there at this particular church. I was a student and an instructor in their leadership training school. From 2001 to 2009, when we left, I served in various capacities of leadership, which I named the team the Nehemiah team. The pastor liked acronyms, so I could come up with cool names. So TNT, the Nehemiah team, they like that. So I don't know if they still got that name or not, but I volunteered in many areas of the ministry to meet the needs of the congregation whenever I could, because that was my community, and I did what I could. I was a small group leader. I was the lead sound tech. I was media director. I was youth director. I was Sabbath teacher. I was education director. Wherever there was a gap, and if I could fill it, I'd do it, because that was our community, and I wanted it to succeed. And I just did everything that I could, and I designed their website. I mean, I did everything that I could. And because of my dedication to the congregation's mission and vision, and my experience, and the effort that I put towards my professional experience, and then the effort that I put towards their leadership training school, I eventually qualified as a pastor. And in May of 2006, I joined the full-time staff, replacing the outgoing executive pastor. I also accepted the invitation to join the board of elders and the board of directors. So in addition to my responsibilities of assisting the senior pastor in just the day-to-day operations of running the congregation, I also would oversee creating various ministries. They had Monday night classes and stuff. I was in charge of that. I was in charge of recruiting people to teach the classes. I taught classes, and just other things. Whatever I could, I was trying to help create things. We did an outreach Cinco de Mayo with the Sephardic Anasim and all that. So we did several fun things. But shortly after I became a pastor in 2006, Margaret and we started another Havurah group in our home, because at this point they had stopped all the small groups. And a lot of people believed that they should have kept them going, because that's what really fed a lot of the people in the congregation were small groups. So Margaret and I wanted to start another one. And so after every service, we opened up our house, because we lived right near the church. After every Saturday, we'd open up our home and invite everyone over. And so after service, a good chunk of the community would come over, and we would stay up all night Saturday nights, and that was our new Havurah group. We called it the Tribe of Issachar group. And that was like a push that I was trying to get the Havurah groups, the small groups, going again. And what I did was I took a map of Israel, and I put it over Denver, and I made Denver like where Jerusalem is. And I took the map of where the tribes were, and I divided it up. And so all of the Metro Denver was the name of a tribe. And then I found someone living in each area, and I recruited them to be the leader in that small group. And so we had 12 tribes 12 Havurah groups that everyone could go to in the community. I thought that was a brilliant idea. I thought it was great. And actually, those groups, after we left, some of them stayed going, even after they shut the thing down. When I left, they shut it down. They didn't want to have anything to do with it. But we didn't realize it at the time, but that particular group that we had started was actually the groundwork that would result in starting a new Messianic congregation. And the more I studied, because you see, when I became an elder, when I became a pastor in this community, I met their requirements. I met the rules that they came up with in order to be a pastor. And so once I became a pastor, I'm like, okay, what does that mean? So then I started studying it in the Word, and I started looking at it, and I'm thinking, I don't know if I fit the biblical requirements to be a pastor. And the more that I looked, the more that I started to ask the question again. That question came up, why do we do what we do? Because after we stopped doing Sunday, Christmas, Easter, and all that stuff, okay, we got rid of that, I stopped asking the question. But now the question is coming back up, and now the question is, why do we do what we do in regard to running a congregation? Why do we do what we do in regard to church leadership? Why do we do what we do in regard to children's education and their involvement in the community? Why do we do what we do in regard to how we teach the Word? And as I started to look at this question again and ask it, as I looked at the community, I started to realize, I don't know if I agree with the philosophy of ministry that the way this church is being run. Now, every church has a different philosophy of ministry. Most people, when they find out that we keep the kids in the service, they call us family integrated, and they kind of give us a label. So there's different ways to run congregations, and the best way to find out is to ask the leaders, how is the congregation run? What are the main focuses? And so that's what I mean by philosophy of ministry. So at a given point at the end of 2008, Margaret and I realized that we didn't agree with the philosophy of ministry at this particular community, and the staff realized that too, that we had different views in the way that we raised our children and things that we wanted to do. And so we came to a mutual decision that it would be best if we left. So I resigned and we quietly left, and on March 14th, 2009, with the support of 22 like-minded friends, families, and singles, we started the Front Range Messianic Community in our living room in Northglenn with three main areas of focus. When we started Front Range, there were three main areas of focus: family integration, being elder-led, and giving expositional teaching. Those were the three main areas that we understood that we wanted to apply in our church group. Family integration, what does that mean? Bringing our children into the church with us, into the sermon with us. Not sending them out into the classroom watching VeggieTales and coloring on coloring pages. They're not learning anything when you do that. If you bring them into the sermon, yeah, they might be young. Yeah, they might not grasp everything, but they're grasping some. And also, they're coming to the understanding that this is for me too, because when you start to separate them, when we have age segregation, they're thinking that's for old people. I never want to be an old person. I don't want to do that. I want to go to kids' classes. I want to go and have fun. And so, but the sermon's fun too, And so that was one of the main things, is having our children involved with us in the service. The second thing was being elder-led. We want to have a plurality of leaders. We don't want to be just one single leader. Yes, I'm the primary teacher. Yes, you usually hear my voice on the phone or whatever. I'm the primary person doing the stuff. We planted the church in our living room, but it's always been my desire from the beginning to have multiple leaders. I don't want to be the senior pastor. I want to have elders. I want to have accountability with other men with equal authority that we lead this congregation. The only offices that we see in the Bible, in the New Testament, about churches are elders and deacons. You don't see senior pastors. You don't see the word pastor used. Elders and deacons, those are the two titles that we have in the church. And so that's what we're trying to establish here at Front Range. The other thing is expositional teaching. Expositional teaching is basically taking a chunk of Scripture and teaching through the Scripture. Most congregations will have a topic, and they want to teach a topic. Okay? Expositional teaching, you look at that chunk of text, and then you teach whatever it says. With a topical teaching, you come up with a topic, and then you look for scriptures to support your point. Does that make sense? And so that's why we decided we're going to go through the Torah. We're going to stick with teaching the Torah. So we used to go through the one-year Torah cycle, and I remember I used to think when we were in our living room, I thought, okay, people aren't reading the Torah portion, so we're going to read the whole Torah portion. And we had a double portion one time. It was like 8 chapters. And people are nodding off. We were trying to read the whole thing. And so after going through the one-year Torah cycle, we realized, let's slow it down. And that's when I discovered the 3-year Torah cycle. So we started going through the 3-year Torah cycle. And we taught through that once, the whole thing, over 3 years. And in the middle of that, I think we were in Leviticus, or Zadie says even before that, we were saying, once we get through this, then let's start going through an epistle or something from the apostolic scriptures. And when it,
in your living room in North,
in the living room,
he told me that. That's what you wanted to do.
so that's been in our hearts. Why? Because one of the things that we found, every now and then, we've sent our kids to VBS in the Vacation Bible School, in the summer, give them something to do, so we'd send them. And every time the teachers at the Vacation Bible School, they'd say, your kids know so much about the Old Testament. They knew about Moses, and they knew about Esther. I'm thinking, yeah, well, that's all they know. But then when I'm telling my kids, hey, kids, remember the story about Zacchaeus? And, what was that, Dad? I'm like, ooh, we're not spending enough time in the apostolic scriptures. We're not spending enough time talking about Yeshua. And so that's why we decided that once we finish teaching through the whole Torah, then we're going to get into an epistle or a gospel, and we chose the Gospel of Matthew. We've been in Matthew for a little over, a year and a half now, and we're starting chapter 7 in a couple weeks. This week I'm going to be teaching on Shavuot. But so we've been taking our time. But that's the way it should be. That's expositional teaching, and going through slowly and pulling out what's there, not coming up with a topic and then supporting our topics with scriptures. Topical teaching is good. Like I said, this week I'm going to teach on Shavuot. And so there I'm gonna that's the topic, and I'm gonna pull out passages to support that. But still, there are times for it, but most of the time we're gonna teach expositionally. So those are the 3 areas that we founded the community on. So now I'm transitioning from my history to the history of Front Range. So why the name Front Range Messianic Community? When we started the congregation, I sat down with some friends, and there were some people who were giving us some ideas, and we're trying to come up with some of these new names of these church. There's a lot of cool names out there for churches, and so we're trying to come up with a cool name. And I thought, what? I kind of like in the Bible where they say the church at Ephesus. That's just the church at Ephesus, or the church in Galatia. They didn't have any cool name. It's just that's where they were at. So I thought, okay, we're renting this house in North Glen. If I call this the church in North Glen, we're going to move. And the way that the cities are set up here, you cross the block, you're in another city. So I thought, what are the chances that I'm going to move into another city? So what can we call it that's general in this area? We thought of like Rocky Mountain Messianic Community or Colorado Messianic Community. And for some reason the name Front Range really stuck. And I thought, let's just do that. We'll call ourselves the Front Range Messianic Community, and as we have to pop around, we're still in the Front Range, so it's still going to be applicable. And sure enough, we went from North Glen to Westminster, and now we're over here in Arvada. So I'm glad we didn't call ourselves the North Glen congregation. But also, we chose an English name because we wanted people to understand that you don't have to be Jewish to come here. Because you have all these other Messianic communities, and Royal Israel, Yeshua Tzion, you got, and they got these Hebrew names, and people are intimidated to call. But even still, I got people calling me saying, "Do I have to be Jewish to come?" I'm like, the name is, Front Range Messianic Community. We even left the Jewish out, because some congregations call themselves Messianic Jewish. We left the Jewish out because most of us aren't Jewish, and we're not trying to be Jewish. And I don't want people to think that we're, that's what we're doing. I don't want the Jewish community to say, "You guys aren't Jewish." So, But we're Messianic, so you kind of get the idea of what that means. So what does Messianic mean? We get the word Christian from the word Christos. It's a Greek word that means anointed one. You know, Jesus, Yeshua is the anointed one. And so the Hebrew version of that is Mashiach. The Messiah is the anointed one. So when you say Christian and you say Messianic, you're basically saying the same thing. But when you say Christian, what do you think of? Sunday, Christmas, Easter. So when you say Messianic, the idea is that you would understand it's a Hebraic perspective. Instead of Sunday, Christmas, Easter, you got Shabbat, Pesach, and Hanukkah or whatever. And so that's why we chose the names that we did. Now, what about our logo? Josh, will you pass those around? So our logo, if you haven't seen our logo, and say again, I'm a graphic designer, so this stuff's important to me. Our logo, what is that? Ethan, did you get one? What kind of candle is that? Look on there. What kind of candle is that? What is it, Aaron?
Messianic Judaism.
Well, what kind of candle is it? Mimi, can you tell me? Yeah, Havdalah candle. If you've ever closed Shabbat with us, then you've seen that candle. It's got multiple candles on it, and it makes a big giant flame. And our service used to be from 3 o'clock to 5 o'clock, and then we'd have dinner together. And so around that time, sometime the service is going to end, or the Shabbat's going to end. So we would do Havdalah together as a community. And remember, Matt, we used to, at first it was just me, and I'd get a rotation of the kids to come through, and the kids would go through the little ceremony with us, and I would have them dip the candle, and they would do that. And then I said, I don't want to be the only one doing it, so I started recruiting the other dads. I got Matt in there and the other dads. Okay, you're going to lead your kids through it. And so we had different families, different dads leading their kids in the whole community in closing Shabbat. So that became kind of a sweet part of our Shabbat, a special time for us. And the kids knew that, and it was just they all looked forward to doing it. And so, the Havdalah candle, this one has 3 wicks on it. It's got the sheen on top and the flame, and then it's got the glow around it. And so we look at the candle, and the 3 parts. It could be the olive tree, right? It could be the 3 Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. It could be the 3 patriarchs, or it could be Father, Son, and Spirit, right? And then you have the sheen in the flame. And what does the sheen represent? The sheen is known as an abbreviation for my Shaddai, El Shaddai. The all-sufficient one is another way of translating that. It's talking about Hashem. And every time it's used of Hashem in the Bible, it's in reference to children. With Abraham, he called himself Hashem. Why? He was going to provide. He said, you're going to be the father of many nations. And then when he talks to Isaac, you're going to bear children. Remember, Isaac, both Abraham and Isaac prayed for their wives because their wives were barren. And that's when he reveals himself as El Shaddai. That's when God reveals himself as El Shaddai. It's always in regard to children. Hey, we're a community all about children. And so that was a significant thing for us to have that in there, to have the sheen in there. And in that glow that comes off of that candle, again, if you've seen the Havdalah candle when it's lit, it's a lot of light. And that's what we're hoping this community is a lot of light wherever we're at. And so that's the meaning behind our logo. Now on the back of the card, this is a slogan that it's kind of our theme. And there's a song called L'Ador V'Ador that we haven't sung recently, but we would sing it at every feast day because that's kind of our theme song. But L'Ador V'Ador means from generation to generation. That is key for us. That is important for us. We're not just trying to start a congregation to where we just come on Saturdays in our Jewish costumes and just hang out and eat bread and drink wine. No, we want to develop a community that's lasting. We want to raise up all of these young boys to be the next leaders. We want to hand this off to them that they would take this to the next generation. We have to be intentional on that, and we have to have it has to be a lifestyle, and it has to be something that we are totally sold into. And and it has to be a commitment if this is what we really want to do, because that's what God has told us to do. It has to be from generation to generation. And so what we're trying to do is establish our roots deep so that this congregation will have longevity. So we started in the living room. We had only 2 or 3 services in our living room. And that was from March 2009, we had those services in our living room. And I remember it was kind of it was real intimate, because we were in our living room and the kids were on the floor and they're coloring, and I think I taught from a bar stool or something. So I've got pictures of it, but it's real. It was a home church, and I had no idea that we were going to find a place to meet soon. And the guy that I was working for, I mentioned to him that we've got this little home church, and he says, "Well, I got a building over here. Do you want to use the building?" So we went and looked at it, and the room is actually smaller than this. Probably maybe even from here over, wouldn't you say? Maybe a little bit bigger. But it was this little basement, and with a low ceiling. But we said, yeah, we'll use that. So from the end of March 2009 till August 2010, that was the place we met. And the building is like this little cinder block square thing. And in the front, I thought it looked kind of like a temple. So I would take pictures of it to make it look bigger than what it was. But at the time, we were trying to attract people. We were trying to get people to come visit us. But again, that was a small, intimate setting. We would eat after every service, and we would all sit around the edge of the wall. The kids would color in front of us, and we would all have our Bible study. And since we lived on top, actually, we left the house in North Glen, and we moved because the building was a 3-story building, actually 2-story with a basement. The second story was an apartment, and so I fit my whole family up there. It was 2 large bedrooms, but we also counted the shul where we met as one of our rooms, and we would go down there and hang out. And since we lived there, after service, sometimes we'd be there till 2 in the morning, just hanging out, just talking and watching movies and stuff. And I think it was around that time in May, I went to a family integrated community in a conference in North Carolina, and I got some ideas, and that's when I learned about elders, and because again, I was brought up Catholic. I didn't know really much about congregations, and then at the congregation that I went to, they had a certain way of doing things. And so then from the white building around August in 2010, there was a few folks that needed to be baptized. They hadn't been baptized, and one of them was Maya, and I think it was Joshua and Matt. Matt hadn't been baptized, and so these 3 we needed a place to immerse them. So I said, okay, well, I'll find a place. And so I went up the street to the Baptist church, and they said, yeah, sure. So they showed me the baptismal, and we got to talking, and the pastor says, you want to use our youth room for your congregation? I said, yeah, sure, that'd be great. And so for that first month, we met down in their youth room, and he had gone on sabbatical for a month. And so we did 4 services there in their basement. And when he got back, I pulled him aside. I said, he was charging us, $300 a month. I think that's their charges at the building too. And I said, what would it take for us to use the sanctuary? He says, oh, you want to use the sanctuary? Go ahead. I'm like, you serious? He says, yeah, go ahead. So we got to use the sanctuary. And while we were at the building, there was one fellow that donated us a whole sound system. And we still have it too. We just don't need it here. But we had speakers and amplifier, microphones, and we had the whole sound system. So we had to set that up every Shabbat. We couldn't use their sound system. That was the only catch. But it was a great location. It was actually just like this, just bigger. The sanctuary was bigger, could hold about 300 people. And then the fellowship hall was maybe about 3 times the size of this. And so it was just a really nice place for us to have our service, and then we come back and have our lunch or have our dinner at that time. And it was a really great place, while we had it. And we were there from August 2010 till May 2013. But immediately the pastor, after a few months of being there, he pulled me aside and he says, I don't see a lot of Hispanic people in your congregation. I said, well, there's not. I said, it's my family, and I think there was maybe a couple of other families that were in there. I said, why do you ask that? He goes, I thought you were a Spanish-speaking congregation. I said, no. I said, I don't speak Spanish. He says, oh. He says, well, the reason I let you guys come because I thought you were going to be able to reach out to all the Hispanics in the area. I said, I'm sorry. I said, I don't speak Spanish. And so, but he got over that, and then they were fine about it. But I think their leadership began to ask questions, and they thought, well, okay, if they're not a Hispanic congregation going to reach out to the Hispanics in the area, then maybe they ought to join the Southern Baptist Convention. Because there is a Messianic wing of the Southern Baptists, in case you didn't know that. So they wanted us to join the Southern Baptists. Well, we don't want to be a part of any organization. That's not our goal. It's not necessary. We're autonomous, and we have our own leaders. We don't need anyone else telling us what to do. We're our own little family here. And so since that happened, since we declined that, I think that's what kind of led to eventually asking us to leave that particular location. But while we were there, that's when a lot of things happened at Front Range. A pastor that I served with at the community that we came from, he joined us, and since we both served as pastors together at this other congregation, someone suggested that maybe we can serve Front Range as the two elders. And then also we would have a small group of men called the advisory team, and so that would be the three elders. That would be kind of the three-part leadership. And so, that's the one time that we voted as a community. Everyone thought that was okay, and so that's what we did. I think at that time, we were the biggest that we've been. We were like 80 people. I think 80 people at the most were coming to our service. Not that we're trying to get big, but that was the biggest that we had ever been. But the weird thing was, the expression of our service had changed. When we started off, we were, Messianic, light, I'd say, not as much as we are now, but we were still trying to understand it all, even though we had been doing it since 2000. But with the influx of people that were coming, it was started to shift. And at one point, we had removed all the Hebrew from our service. And all the songs that we were singing were Christian songs. And I remember thinking, something's missing. Something ain't right here. And so as we started to swing back to at least where we started from, there were some folks who were resistant, and they said, you're becoming legalistic or you're becoming rabbinic. And they just thought, and we even had a meeting. We had a church meeting one time because I wanted to find out what people thought about what we were doing. And there were some folks that stood up and said, there's not enough Jesus taught here. It's all Torah, and there's no evangelism. We don't have any outreach, and so we had all these negative complaints, and I was really surprised. And some folks stood up and said, I don't know what you're talking about, because whenever Michael teaches from the Torah, he brings up Yeshua, and so that shouldn't be a problem, because Yeshua's always taught. But I remember hearing someone making the comment that all they wanted was Sunday church on Saturday. And I've seen Messianic congregations like that, where it's just a Christian veneer on, or rather a Jewish veneer on, a Christian service. It's basically a traditional Christian service, but you got the keeping the tzitzit on. And so we started to make that change, and eventually folks left, and several of these families, unfortunately, even went back to Sunday, Christmas, and Easter services. They went back to contemporary Christian stuff. And part of this, too, we were going through a teaching by Tim Hegg. I make it no secret that he's I consider him my teacher. He's the guy that I get most of my teachings from out of Tacoma, Washington. But he had helped me out when we started the congregation. And he had pointed me to this thing that he had put together called I Will Build My Ecclesia. And it's basically an outline on how to start a Messianic community and things to consider. You don't have to follow everything he does, but just consider these things. And so I could see that we were going to have a problem with the dance, because we were doing Hebraic dance, because there were some changes we wanted to make, mainly about modesty. And we're going to talk about all these things later in these classes. The other thing was the music. I was under the understanding before we started digging into the Word that a church should consist of a senior pastor and a worship leader, and those are the two paid staff that you have. That's not in the Bible. You know, and then even evangelism. What does evangelism look like? Should our service be a seeker-sensitive thing where you can just allow anyone to come in and they can, we deliver them a soft message, preach them the gospel, and so we considered all of that, and I kind of gave the caveat to everyone that as we go through this, we're going to step on people's toes, and so be ready, because we need to challenge ourselves and ask ourselves again, why do we do what we do? And sure enough, as we started going through that, unfortunately, our numbers dwindled to I think about 25 or 30 people, and that's when we left for Southern. We didn't have a place to go, so we went to this little place called the Grange Hall, where they only charge us $55 a time to meet. And so for a month, we were kind of in limbo. We were homeless there. And I had been going around to a lot of these churches asking if they had a place we could rent, even just a room. Some wouldn't even respond. One of them, there's a Lutheran church up here that we went several times. We met with them. We did a walkthrough. They sat down. They interviewed us. They really liked us. But when they took it to the church to vote, the church said no, because they found out we had a lot of kids, because they had Cub Scouts renting from them, and the Cub Scouts would destroy their place. So they said no, if they got a lot of kids, then they didn't want us. So we almost had that place. Then we found a place in Old Town Arvada where there was a Spanish-speaking Messianic congregation, Beit Teshuvah, and they had just stopped. And so we were going to take over their lease, and we actually signed the papers. We had the keys and everything. And then Miriam was doing flute lessons here, and I came to bring her, and her instructor said, why don't you ask these guys? Because she knew we were looking for a congregation or a place to rent. And I thought, yes. And so I called them up, and they said, sure. So we turned down the other place. I gave them back their keys, and we started here. And this was in June of last year. And so we've been at Pine Brook since. And since we made this change to Pine Brook, we made some changes to the things that we're doing. Now that we've been doing this for 5 years, now that we're more aware and we have better direction of what we're going to do, we decided to make our services more traditional. When I say traditional, I'm talking about more Jewish tradition. Less Christian-like and more Jewish-like. And again, as we get into our classes, I'm going to explain why and why that's important for us. We don't say the sacred name anymore. We used to do that when we started here in June of 2013. We stopped using the sacred name. I gave a whole teaching about that, and I think that's online. But we're going to go over that again. Why don't we use the sacred name? We read what the translations say in our Bibles. If it says Lord, we say Lord. In our liturgy, we say Adonai. We say Elohim. We don't have a problem with that. Now that we've moved here, we want to protect our community. We don't put our address on our website because, again, this is our family. You don't leave your front door open in your house and just say anyone can come on in and come and sit down at the table. You want to know who's coming into your house. And so in the same way, we're trying to protect our community, and we want to meet the people who are coming in. We want to talk to them because, like I'm saying, with our kids, we want to protect our kids. We've had crazy people, people with strong opinions come and visit us. And there were some people who said, if we didn't say the name of God the right way, we're praying to a demon. If we didn't say the name of Yeshua the way that they wanted us to, then we're praying to a demon. That if we weren't doing these certain things, the Holy Spirit wasn't going to come. Or everyone had, dreidels are pagan. Or everyone's got something. And so it's, I want to stop the riffraff. And even, I want to, it was almost like when the new people come, we'd have to sit at the oneg table and, are they saying anything crazy? Remember that one time that lady confronted me? I was out looking for a place for us to rent. And I was excited. I said, I think we found a place. It was over by 72nd and Irving. I said, I think we found a place, and I'm explaining it, and she stands up and she says, who is he to make all the decisions? We're all the church. I don't know. She just started going off, and I thought, what in the world is this? Who brought this lady? So, and it really shook up some of our kids. And I want to protect our children. I want them to feel safe when people come. And, and that's why I talk to the people before they come into the door, and that's why I send out an email and I let everyone know we're going to have guests coming so that no one's surprised. And I want everyone to know and feel safe that, okay, we know that these people are here. And then we want to welcome them and get to know them because they want to get to know us. Our mission, one of the things that Kevin has been pushing me for is that we need a mission, we need a vision. And I agree. But for those of you who know me, I'm slow. And not that I'm, yes, I'm probably a procrastinator too. But also I want to be careful of what I'm doing. And I know some people were surprised that last January, or was it? Yeah, it was this January. I finally bought myself a prayer shawl, a tallit, and I finally bought a siddur. And some people have had these things for years, and then when I buy it, they think I'm going rabbinic, and I'm thinking, well, I'm just going slow. I want to know what it's about, all these different things. Before I make a change, I want to know about it. I want to understand it before we make a change. And so anyway, with our mission and our vision, I've been taking time to really understand this. And this isn't something profound, but this is what I understand our mission to be. It's simply to sanctify the name of God on the earth. That's our mission. To sanctify the name of God on the earth. How do we sanctify the name of God on the earth? By walking out His Torah. By living as His people. And as we're out in the world and we're living as His people, people will see us and they'll be able to identify us as one of His followers. We're sanctifying His name. Our vision. To establish a community of faith where the ways of Adonai are regularly studied and then practiced by the members of the community in order to teach them to our children who are the next generation. Simple as that. That's our vision. When we come here, we're going to teach the Word of God. Why? To strengthen the community. We're going to study His ways regularly and then practice them. We're not studying them just to study them. We don't just listen to it and say, well, that's a nice word. Yeah, that's, it's pretty cool what Jesus said. No, now we're going to do it. Now we're going to actually walk it out, and then we're going to teach it to our children, and they're the next generation. They're going to pass it on to the next generation. So that's important. That's really important to us. So that's our mission, and that's our vision. Online, you can find our statement of faith. I've got a problem with statement of faith. The more that I'm studying, the more that I'm realizing it's difficult to say that this is what everyone believes, because does everyone believe that really? I hope so. And I think our statement of faith is pretty general. But I think it is good in that it gives people an understanding that we do believe Yeshua is Messiah. We do believe that Yeshua is divine, where there's some Messianic communities who don't believe that Yeshua is divine. And so we want to make sure that we're clear about that. And so that's why we leave the statement of faith up there. But it's a general one. But that is briefly me, my wife and my family, and Front Range and where we are right now. We're still growing. This week, we've got the Guzmans here visiting us. And you're planning to be here on Shabbat too? And so we've got them on Shabbat, and we've got a small handful of people who might be here this Shabbat visiting us. And usually, they have experience in the Messianic community, but usually around the feast days, we have an influx of people interested who are Messianic, and they're trying to find a place to go and celebrate the feast days. But this time, all these people, they're just new. I was thinking, it's normal that people call around the feast days, but all these people, and I tell them, you're going to come to Shavuot? They're like, what's that? Pentecost, what's that? So I'm like, okay, so it's not related, but it's just interesting how God is moving families, and people aren't intimidated, because that's what I get some pushback because we don't put our address on the website, and people say that looks kind of like you guys are a cult or something. No, call us and find out. I mean, we're just trying to be protective, and I'm probably going to make a video and put it on the website just to explain to people why we want them to call. But again, the goal isn't to grow fast. The goal isn't to be big. It would be good to be full time, to serve more, to be more available for the community. But the goal is to grow deep, to grow tight, and to grow deep and have a good foundation, because we want this thing to have longevity, and we want to do this for our children. And that's us in a nutshell. The goal of this series of lessons is to present a brief overview of the beliefs and practices that characterize a Messianic Jewish congregation. More specifically, how these traditions are viewed and kept at the Front Range Messianic Community. For more information, please visit frontrangemessianic.com.